Hello everyone and welcome to the new episode of the Darktable. In this episode I would like to show you some advanced usage of masking options in Darktable, which can help you to improve your masking and to avoid or remove some typical artifacts that can arise by masking. Okay, so let's get started. In our first example here, I would like to demonstrate the usage of parametric masking options in Darktable, and the goal is to emphasize those two pumpkins a little bit more by separating them from the background so that we will be able to darken the background a little bit and also to change the color of the background so that we have also the separation in the color. So let's make some basic adjustments first, like lens correction, denoising, maybe something like that, and maybe also rotation and perspective. Let me use those show options. And correct the perspective. And now we will use a new instance of exposure module, and with help of parametric masks we will darken the background. So we'll create a new instance of exposure module and maybe also give it a name. Let's rename it to darken background. And you see those icons here. I will use this one here because we have combination of different masking options, parametric mask and drone mask. I always use this one. So when we click there, now we have different options for the masking. Now we have possibilities to use some drone mask if we wish, with the shapes here, and parametric masks. What is a parametric mask? Parametric mask is actually a quite nice option to select a group of pixels according to some specific parameter, or better to say, according to the properties of those pixels, like color, brightness, saturation, and so on. And for that, we have here one list of different parameters that can be used for that selection. And the first one is G, or a gray value slider. That means the brightness slider, and to be able to judge makes sense that particular channel for our selection, we can display that channel on the canvas when we go to the slider of that particular channel, in this case G, and press C button. And now we can see how our photo or our pixels according to the brightness are looking like. And as you can see, our pumpkins does not differentiate from the background with this particular value, so the brightness won't help us to be able to select our pumpkins. So let's see what else we have here. Now the next one is the red channel. Let's click on that and let's display those values. And this one could be useful because, as you can see, our pumpkins are somewhere in that bright area of the red channel. So maybe we can use this one for selection. But before we do that, let's go further. Next one is the green channel. No, there's not much difference between background and our pumpkins here. The blue channel, again, see, also not much difference. And now we have here 3 other options, which are options of that particular color space that our module exposure uses. And the first one, that JZ or JZ, I don't know how to spell it correctly, is practically similar like a G. That's the brightness value. Let's see. Now also won't help us here. The next one, CZ or CZ, is actually it's chroma channel, but that means saturation channel. And when we click on that one, we can recognize our pumpkins much better here. So this channel can help us. And by the way, the dark colors are much more saturated areas. So our pumpkins are quite saturated in comparison to the background. So we can eventually use this one. And the last one, that HZ or HC, is practically color of the pixels and or hue. So let's see what this one looks like. Okay, with this one we're not that much we don't get that much options to select our pumpkins, but we can get rid, for example, of some area. So now we have seen all the channels, all those different values, and now we can try to select our pumpkins, and we can use maybe that hue option and saturation option, and eventually the red one. So let's see. So as you can see, as you can have seen, the best option what we had was that chroma channel or that saturation channel. Let's display it a little bit more. But this channel has on the bottom part also some saturated area, and we need to get rid of that. So that means we can combine first the hue channel, as you can see, with the hue channel. When we choose the reds in the photo, we can get rid of the bottom part. And now we can combine that with that saturation thingy, and we will get our pumpkins masked. Okay, so let's click on the hue channel, and now we can use that color picker for the range, and we can choose some color range of our pumpkins, let's say here. And now we can turn our mask indicator on and see what we have chosen. And as you can see, we have now chosen the upper part of the photo, and this is here is indicated the range that we have chosen. And we need to refine our mask to get our pumpkins by choosing also that saturation channel, like that. And we can also use that color range for that thing. And now you can see we have already chosen the most of the pumpkins, but we need to refine our mask even better. For mask refinement, we have additional area here that can help us to get even better masks after we have chosen those parameters above. And for us, it would be quite interesting to use those 4 sliders here at the end: feathering radius, blurring radius, mask opacity, and mask contrast. Let's first use feathering radius and see what happens. And now, as you can see, how nicely our mask fits to the edges of our pumpkins. So that feathering radius or feathering guide is quite nice option to take account the texture of the surrounding, especially on the edges of the mask, and gives us a nice refinement so that we can be more precise by masking. And as you can see, I have chosen only feathering radius a little bit and have nice mask of our pumpkins and of course our flowers also. But we don't want to mask, actually we don't want to mask our pumpkins, but we want to mask our background because we want to darken the background. And now we have also the option to toggle the polarity of those masks, to invert that mask that we have now made by choosing this option here. That is invert of all channels and polarities. When we click there, now we have inverted our mask. As you can see, everything is masked except our pumpkins and some flowers. And we can refine that even better by using mask opacity. Now when we go down a little bit, we have even more masking of the or we exclude even more of our pumpkins. And we don't need to be too precise because this area is quite dark, so we don't need that. And now we can disable the mask indicator and darken our background. And voila, you see, we have nice darkening of the background without too much, without influencing too much the pumpkins and also the flowers. Okay, what can we do next? We can now add one more exposure module to brighten the photo a little bit more overall. So we can add one more and brighten the photo a little bit, maybe not that much. And now I will go to the color balance RGB and add some contrasts and saturation, just a tiny bit, something like that. And now we want to give the background a little bit another color or colder look. So we can use color balance RGB again. Let's say, let's call it colder background. And the nice thing is we can reuse that mask that we have made by exposure by choosing the option here, raster mask, excuse me, this one. When we click there, we can choose under this option here what kind of raster mask we will use. We have created only one mask with exposure module, and we can use this one. As you can see, we have only one in the list, exposure darken background. Now we will use that one and go to the 4 ways tab and maybe I don't know, choose this slider here for power slider, choose some color and add a bit of the saturation there. And now, as you can see, we have also changed the color of the background, and now we have the pumpkins nice in the foreground, and we have that distinction between foreground and our pumpkins. As you can see, we have now nice photo here. Okay, So let's see what can we do next. In this example, we have a nice tree with some branches with moss on them. And that's quite interesting scene. I would like to emphasize that moss area. But let me first add some corrections and maybe a bit more exposure, that we can see the scene a little bit clearer. And as you can see, this moss area is embedded in a lot of restless texture. So we have other branches and other details, they are fighting for attention. So what we need to do is to isolate that area with moss and calm down a little bit the rest, the background, and also maybe darken the background a little bit. Okay, let's get started. To soften that contrast, local contrast in the background of the moss, we will use contrast equalizer. And first we need to mask or isolate our moss, and we will use parametric mask for that. And here, as you can see, we have different parameters because the contrast equalizer is working in LAB color space. We have another sliders here, but to some extent they are quite similar with the sliders that we had in exposure module. So let's start with L, that is the brightness slider, and see what we get there. Okay, but won't help us too much by isolation. Let's see the A channel, that is green and red combined. So we see some green, maybe that could be useful. What about B channel? Oh, that's much better. So our mouse has a lot of red, a lot of yellow, excuse me, and maybe that can be useful for isolation. And then we have C, and that is chroma. That means saturation. Saturation can also be quite useful. As you can see, our mouse is quite saturated in comparison with the background. And age, that is hue or colors of the pixels. Okay, we can start similar like in the last example. We can start with hue. So we'll use that color picker for range and choose some area, let's say here, with the color of the mouse, and see what we get. I think we need to brighten that a little bit because there are some areas that are not included in the mask. So let's go down to the red and yellow, maybe something like that. And of course we also need to refine our mask a little bit with feathering guide. So we will go up a little bit with feathering radius, maybe a tiny bit mask contrast. But as you can see, we have our mouse selected, but also some areas in the background that we don't want. And now we can use other sliders to improve that better. Okay, let's see what kind of, I think the B was interesting. That can be used, and also saturation, as I remember. So let's use first the B and go remove the blue part of the B and go up. Oh, that's too much. Let's go back. Let's say something like here, and maybe also remove. Oh, that's too far. Okay, now I will say that's good enough. Maybe even more mask contrast. Let's see, let's play a little bit with the radius, and okay, that should be enough. But what we don't want to influence that moose. What we want to influence is the background, so we also need to invert that mask here on this icon. And as you can see, we have now isolated our mouse. Maybe we can also here play a little bit with opacity so that we get the mask even better. And now the masking is done. We can now use the contrast equalizer, go down with that smoothing. Maybe not too much on the fine area. Let's say something like that. And as you can see, we have calmed down a little bit the background. And now we can use color balance RGB to add some contrast. Overall in the photo, maybe also a bit of saturation. Okay, let's see what we can do next. Now I would like to add the background a little bit misty or foggy look. And I will use diffuse and sharpen for that, because it's quite nice option for diffusion. But this time we will move our diffuse and sharpen over the local contrast, because we will like to add that effect after we calmed down the background. So we go with diffuse and sharpen over the contrast equalizer. And now we can play a little bit with the sliders here, but I would also like to use to influence only the background, so we can now also use that Rasta mask and choose in the menu down the contrast equalizer. So we are using practically the same mask that we have made with the contrast equalizer, and now we can add some diffusion. Let's go maybe 2 iterations, I don't know. Let's say 2, and play a little bit with other sliders, let's say this one, until we get desired effect. As you can see, now we have even more calm down the background and give it that nice nice fogginess. I don't know, I think, no, we don't need to go too far. Let's say something like that. And now I will add one more diffuse and sharpen module just to sharpen a little bit the photo, but without any masking. So let's go one more, and I don't know, let's see what we can use. Maybe clarity, my preset. Let me see how it looks when I look at that near. Yeah, that's okay. Maybe as the last step, add even more contrast there. I don't know how far we should go. Okay, now quite nice. And of course, because we have now that mask of our mouse, we can also manipulate the colors. I don't think that it's needed here in this case, but let's say I would like to give the background even more bluish look, so we can use one more color balance RGB module and also use the mask of the contrast equalizer and go to the 4 ways tab and maybe, I don't know, just play a little bit with those sliders to be able to adjust the colors. And now we have also the color look if we want. But I think it's not necessary in this case, just as some example. Okay, that's enough for this photo. Let's see what can we do next. In this example, I would like to brighten the photo that much that we don't lose the details in the highlights. So I would like to see some details in the shadows without overexposing that highlight area, that direct sunlight illuminated building. And of course we can do that quite easily with tone equalizer, with help of tone equalizer and compression and a filmic. But I would like to demonstrate how can you do that also with parametric masks. So what we need to do is we need to brighten that photo so far we don't lose the details in the highlights, and then we need to darken that highlights area and eventually also the sky a little bit, and then in the last step we need to brighten the image as whole. Okay, well, let's get started. Okay, let's make some adjustments first. Lens correction, denoising, and eventually also rotation and perspective. Let's see what we get. Okay, now we have prepared our photo, and I will now go with exposure a little bit higher to see how far it can go. I think that's the... if I go further, I'm losing the details in the highlights, so we need to go there, let's say here, and now we can try to do that, what I said before. We need to darken this area and also the sky, and then to brighten the whole photo. Okay, now we will create one more instance of the exposure module and give it the name darken sunlight. And now we'll try to mask only this area with direct sunlight, so we can use whatever. I think the best option will be to use the hue slider. Let's choose some area on the wall here and see what we have got. And now we have masked mostly all highlights, but not only that, also some area in the shadows. We need to reduce that, but first let's adapt our mask a bit better. Let's say something like that. I don't know, we don't need to go too far. And also add some feathering, maybe a bit of contrast. And now we need to get rid of those part of the mask in the shadows, so we can also use that brightness slider here and reduce or remove that mask from the shadows. Let's say something like that. Let's add some kind of feathering a little bit, maybe more opacity. And now we can darken that area. Okay, but as you can see, we have lost some contrast and also have some issues, especially here in this gradient between the dark and bright area. And for that, we have options to further adjust that mask to correct that. In cases like this, where we have those problems with gradient like there, it's not bad to try to refine that mask even further by adding some blur to that feathering guide. So let's do that. Let's add some blur. And we have now, as you can see, before and after. Maybe I should go closer to the gradient. This was the case before we applied that blurring radius, and now we are blurring a little bit further, and now we have nice gradient here. But what is the relationship between feathering guide and blurring radius? For our feathering guide here, we have one default option that says input after blur. What that means? That means that first the parametric mask will get made with those sliders based on the input of the module. That means the data that we get from the first instance of the exposure in this case. Then, if we apply blur, then that parametric mask that have been created here will be blurred first. And that blurred parametric mask will be then guide for feathering radius. So this is how it looks like. Now, if I go back with the blurring radius, that is only the relationship between parametric mask that we have created here and blurring radius, both using that input data from the module and without blurring. So practically we have created the parametric mask here based on the input of the module, and then we have used that parametric mask from the input to as guidance for feathering radius. Now if we apply blur, that parametric mask get first blurred with that blurring radius, and then the feathering radius would be applied as last step. We have, of course, also the other options. For example, we can apply the blur after feathering. Let's say here, input before blur. As you can see, we have practically created the mask with parametric sliders, then applied feathering guide, and then blurred that whole creation with blurring radius. That can help in some cases. Let's see how that looks like. But in this case, I'm getting too much issues here if I use input before blur. So I think this first option is in most cases the best one. There are some cases when where you can use other options, but before we talk too much about that, we have also the options to choose for the feathering guide the output of the module. That means I can also use, for example, that darken part as feathering guide, but in this case this doesn't make much sense. And those cases where we can use other options, I will demonstrate in the next examples. But for this case, the input after blur, that means mask get created, then blurred, and then feathering guide with applied is one of the best options for the most of the cases. Okay, let's refine that mask even better. So let's see how it looks like. As you can see, we are bleeding a little bit in other areas, but that bleeding gradient is so fine that you will not notice it with your eyes. For example, here we can see it better. If I turn the mask on, a little bit of that mask is going also in that direction and here also, but not that noticeable. So if I disable the exposure and enable, you will see almost, you cannot notice too much the difference. And of course, if you have too high, or if you lose too much details, you can also add a bit more opacity to the mask. And now we are good with this darkening. Okay, let's darken the sky now. So let's use one more instance of exposure module and call it darken sky. And now we can use our parametric masks, in this case also the hue slider. So I will choose the range, let's say there, excuse me, and see what we get. Of course, we need to improve that mask. This area is not masked, so we can brighten a little bit our range until we get all sky darkened. And now I will also apply a little bit feathering radius. And as you can see, we have also some area which is also chosen. That is mostly that reflection of the sky here. But we can get rid of that just by using, as example before, by using that slider here, but for brightness, and just exclude everything in shadows. So let's go up. Oh, that's too far. Something like that. Okay, let's darken now the sky and see what we get. Now I will check the edges, especially in those areas where you have chromatic aberrations. You could have some issues like here, for example, and sometimes also here. So we can try to improve that even better now with blurring radius. So we'll add some blurring radius and maybe some opacity, and we are good. We don't have any issues anywhere. As you can see, quite nice. Okay. Oh, maybe we can even darken it even more. Let's look again. Now everything is nice. And now we can use one more exposure module and brighten the whole image now. Let's say something like that. Okay, let's see what we can do next. Okay, yes, let's use color balance RGB now for improvement a little bit more. Add some contrast, maybe some saturation. Also here, I don't know. Maybe I can also use some other options for preservation of chrominance. What do we get with max RGB? Let's use this one and desaturate the highlights. Let's play a little bit with colors calibration. I don't know. It's not too important, just a bit. Let's say something like that. And I would like to apply also some sharpening or local contrast. So let's use diffuse and sharpen for that. Just a preset. Maybe one more for sharpening. Let's use whatever AA filter. And now we're done. So we have brightened our photo. Let's see before and after in this case. Where do we go here? Lens correction, denoising, perspective, there. Take a snapshot and go to the last step, and we have something like that. It could be much better, but I didn't want to lose too much time on that. But the idea was to get that shadows brightened without overexposing that the sunlight area, and we have succeeded in that. Okay, that is enough for this episode, and we will continue this series about advanced using of masking in the next episode. So stay tuned, and thank you for watching.